Hello, this is Taha.
This is Naina,
This is Movie Masala.
and we're here to yap at you about films we watched recently.
And today we're doing All We Imagine as Light.
And Ish.
Okay. So I guess like nothing new has really come out since Spider-Man, which is really taking its time to make as much money as possible.
Genuinely, like I'm still like seeing rounds of people go to watch it both for the first time and for the second, third, fourth time.
Yeah. So I think we both took this time to watch something much smaller or catch up on something that we missed out on, in my case.
Yeah.
So I think I'll start off with All We Imagine as Light, directed by Payal Kapadia.
ഒന്നും എഴുതിയിട്ടില്ല. ഇതിലെന്തോ ഇംഗ്ലീഷിൽ എഴുതിയിട്ടുണ്ട്, പക്ഷെ വായിക്കുമ്പോൾ വേറെ ഭാഷയാണ്. മെയ്ഡ് ഇൻ ജർമ്മനി. പ്രഭചേച്ചിയുടെ ഹസ്ബൻഡ് അവിടെയല്ലേ?
This was like on my list of like movies I should get to kind of list, right? And I also know this was like on Obama's like best film 2024 or something list.
Yeah. It was huge. It was massive when it came out, and it was even in the UK. It was doing like BFI rounds, nor like regular cinema rounds, etc. And also, obviously, it did the festival rounds as well. But I have also surprisingly not watched it.
Yeah. I think it's not the easiest film to find. You can find it on BFI, and no, it's not no longer available. You can find it on Apple TV.
It is available on BFI iPlayer.
I tried to find it. BFI iPlayer said it's not available anymore. Or you can VPN to Disney Plus in India and find it there. But I finally got to watching this film, and starting off, like directed by Payal Kapadia, who also writes this film, it centers around two nurses in Mumbai, Prabha and Anu. And there's like a third nurse whose story I feel is also tied in very much so, Parvati, but I'll get to it in a second.
Parvati. Sorry.
Parvati.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically the story follows around Anu and Prabha as two nurses in Mumbai, and they're also roommates. And I'll be honest, the story doesn't really do much aside from like establish tone and atmosphere and everything very well until like I would say like the 20-25 minute mark, where like this pressure cooker comes in from Prabha's estranged husband, and then the story further kind of starts like getting into what it's about.
Okay.
But also like I think you could very much disagree with me and say like the story very much does start from the top, as it's technically about living in Mumbai and just this idea of where you're from and trying to establish yourself in a city that big as the people you are. So like it's mainly about that. I'll come to it, the whole estranged thing and everything. And like, you know how the common adage of like, oh, the city is a character, which is often said for New York.
Yes, and it is also often said for Mumbai.
Exactly. So Mumbai is a very much character in this film, but Mumbai is the antagonist. If Mumbai is a character in this film, Mumbai is the antagonist.
Oh yeah, I very well believe that. It just is, especially for people who are like working class, as I know the women in this film are.
Yeah. So the women in this film also, I'm really sorry if I can't remember, but I don't think it's specifically said where they're from, but they are from South India because they speak Malayalam mainly.
They're from Kerala.
So they probably are from Kerala. I'm just mean more like, I don't know, specifically in Kerala, or like if there's any like much more specific anything given to where they live in. And there's also some Gujarati spoken in the film as well. So there's also like with one character. So there are multiple places where certain characters are from. So it is very much about from the start, as you hear about like people establishing themselves in Mumbai, about the hustle, the grind of the city, and how it kind of makes you lost. And sometimes you can't find yourself. Sometimes you do find yourself. Sometimes you're just constantly feeling like you are on edge in the city.
Mm-hmm.
And the atmosphere fully also like reinforces that. And it's about that. And that also directly ties into with those two characters about like kind of losing yourself in the city and kind of losing hope and kind of just like becoming this invisible gear in a city, which is also very tied into them being working class, them being South Indian. It's not explicitly about one thing. It's just showing you these characters and their identities and everything kind of make the message with it. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, sure. There's no plot that's like telling you, oh, what's going on. It's not necessarily a narrative driven film, but a character driven film.
Exactly. So from that, the idea of like burnout and the relationship between Prabha and Anu is like Prabha with her estranged husband has kind of like lost this like light in some sense, which
Right.
is, and again, I'll come to the acting, but is very prevalent with those incredibly dead eyes that she has.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the deadest of eyes I've seen in a while.
Okay.
And contrasted with that is Anu, who's like secretly dating this Muslim guy and trying to find a space where they can be intimate. And the film is very intimate with them, which is less common within like broader Indian cinema, but not necessarily maybe like Indian indie cinema, but like Indian cinema in general.
Yes.
So it's kind of like this idea of like someone who's like trying to defy the odds and being like, no, life can be better, where someone's like, this is what life is, I'm just going to continue living it.
Like two ends of the spectrum of living in Mumbai, I guess.
Yeah, I get exactly right. And it is also further compounded by Anu being younger than Prabha.
Okay.
So like all of these things, all of these character moments kind of tie into each other very nicely. It makes sense that all of them, So yeah, it's
Mhm.
about like I said, burnout and holding this light within you in multiple different ways. It's also because like again, Prabha's husband went to Germany and just after a while stopped calling and just also has never come back. So
Right.
there is no explanation given, and it's also treated in such a ghostly way. Like he does haunt the narrative.
Yeah.
And you're like, is he going to come back? Is she going to move on? Has he probably just moved on without her? Like, you're not given zero like information on this. And all you're doing is just sitting with it like Prabha is.
Right. So it's like there's no release for either Prabha or the audience.
Exactly, right? And I think so much of that is brilliantly done by Kani Kusrati, who
Mhm.
plays Prabha. First, like I mentioned, the dead eyes and like the 100-mile stare that she does, it just fucking like burns into your soul.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I haven't watched the film. It's just because every single still or every single like sequence I've seen from it on like social media or something, it's just the way like the performance haunts me. And I'm like,
Exactly.
I'm convinced it will like really depress me.
Yeah, like she is genuinely like feels like this ghost character who's like as haunted as she is haunting as well. And she's really good. Divya Prabha plays Anu, who's also really does a really good job and also does embody this the cheerful energy that she keeps in there despite everything. And then you have this third character who also is, I would say, like a side character that does get a lot of focus and helps move the story along, which is Parvati, played by Chaya Kadam. And all of them, like, acting works really well. And I think alongside the acting, one thing that I definitely notice is the lighting. So in Mumbai, the lighting is so often, just sometimes it's just hard to see. It is dark, right?
Yeah.
But with that said, it is also like the blues and like dim and like grimy as well. Like the lighting has that quality of it never feels bright. It never feels vibrant in that same way. Aside from certain scenes, which is very artfully done, where like you
Yeah.
see Anu and I forgot Anu's boyfriend's name, but
Shiaz.
Thank you. Shiaz like together, but there is this continuous like dim and like depressing lighting throughout, which was done here by Prakash Bhosle. And aside from that, I think the score is also very fun. The composer is Dhritiman Das. There's a specific motif. I know music. I know sound. Oh my! I feel so proud of you remembering the word motif.
Yeah, motif is it's a good pull.
Yeah. So there's a specific motif of like tin 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 tin, like kind of like a piano notes going by. I think piano notes, which is when like Anu and Shiaz like meet and everything. And I think there's like a mischievousness to it, which I also really enjoy. I think the score, its use is done well, and it does help elevate all of those scenes. So I think that's really well. And at the very end, the lighting also comes back when they go to Parvati's village, and it becomes much more warm. It becomes much more lighter. Like the exposure wise, it just goes up. And it is where both of those characters, Prabha and Anu, find resolution for their arcs, which is very well. I'm not going to spoil how it specifically ends, but it doesn't end as depressing as you would think. It rather has a very like nicer, we can go through this kind of conclusion, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, I think that contrast between the lighting of Mumbai, like when you were describing the lighting, I was like, yeah, that sounds about right for Mumbai. That it is a city that has a lot of light, but that light is very like reserved for certain spaces and certain people. And otherwise it does have this kind of griminess. Mumbai is grimy. Like you'll ask any of my family back home who are not from Mumbai and they'll be like, I fucking hate Mumbai. How it's so dirty and it's so grimy and it's so crowded and it's packed full of people. And I think that's kind of the sense that I'm getting like from what you're describing.
Yeah, there's also like this festival scene, and it's also like both this idea of like exuberance and all of that will also like simultaneously like weirdly makes you feel isolated as well, like you're not part of it.
Yes, that's exactly the kind of vibe that Mumbai gives you. I also do have a question because lots of people I know who've watched it have kind of criticized it for being quote unquote poverty porn, like as usual.
I would definitely fight against that because I think these characters have a lot agency. And their poverty is not necessarily the biggest factor. It is to a certain extent, like it, even when it's done, it is done in a way of not they don't have money, but Parvati doesn't have the papers necessary to keep living in the way.
Right.
And this idea of like higher rent income housing is being built nearby. So I don't think like it's that specific on those factors. It's much more focused on their working class. So obviously they don't have as much money to do a lot of those things. And living in Mumbai, what does that like entail? And you just become kind of invisible sometimes in that class bracket.
Right.
So I don't feel like it becomes poverty porn in the same way like something like Slumdog Millionaire is, where the point exactly is,
yeah.
Oh, like this is very sad. It's much more, these people could be in offices and a lot of the story would still work, is what I'm saying, because it's much more about losing yourself in this hustle and bustle of a city and not being able to break out into something meaningful. That I think is still there, like in the story some bodies.
Okay. Glad to hear that. Now I have a counter to all the people who say they hate this film.
Lastly, the thing also like two things is firstly the editing. I think, like I said, it's a slow film though. It takes its time. Like I said, it doesn't start, and then even there, it kind of takes its time. It's a very character-driven film, and I think it works for most of this film. Towards the end, though, I was like, I'm getting sleepy. I need this to stimulate me up just a bit more. Yeah, so I do think at points it can be a bit tediously slow. And I think that is sometimes where it feels a bit like the character moment is done. I understood what was being said. I think you could have just cut a bit earlier. You could have moved forward a bit quicker. So yeah, and lastly, this was written and directed by Payal Kapadia, and like she's the first Indian to win the Grand Prix at Cannes Film Festival. So yeah, that's why this film was offered very highly, but also it was not nominated as India's pick for the Oscars because Lapata Ladies got ahead. And look, I'm making a full assumption here, but I do feel that one reason for that is Lapata Ladies, like distributed by Netflix and everything, but also it's much more of a Hindi language film, while this is much more of a Malayalam language film. And I don't know how key of a decision that played, if any, but it happened. And I think this was definitely the stronger film instead of Lapata Ladies to have been put forward.
No. You're absolutely not wrong about the language distinctions. And also Lapata Ladies is like a big studio production by like an established director, etc. And Lapata Ladies functions much more in the Bollywood industry cog, whereas this one kind of functions outside of it as like an indie independent film.
I do think this was a stronger film, like I said.
Yeah, that makes so much sense.
So yeah, that's it. I'm glad I can like cross this off my watches. I think it was a really well made film. I am happy to watch it.
Yeah. So funny enough, my film isn't an Indian film. However, it is really, really similar to this film.
Okay.
To All We Imagine Is Light. So I watched Ish, which is directed by Imran Perretta.
Why didn't you hit them, bro? Oi, you taking the piss?
Zaki, are you mad? How many did you take, bro?
Hey,
Done your thing,
old
bro.
man. Nice one. What do you want to
Nah,
refresh
can't
you,
lie.
bro?
Come on, bro, let's light this up.
And instead of Mumbai, it is set in the beautiful, beautiful city of Luton. And it revolves around the lives of these like young adolescent boys from the South Asian and Swana communities. It has and the main character is this boy called Ish or Ishmael, played by Farhan Hasnat, and Maram, played by Yahya Kitana. Basically, it follows, like, while you were talking about all we imagine is like, I was like, okay, this is the same, like, format. Because it is also a slow film. It is also a character-driven film. And it has this one moment in the middle that kind of, like, changes the entire kind of path of where these characters are going, which I think is I think it is a very South Asian kind of style of filmmaking as well.
Yeah, like the twist that changes.
Exactly. That's kind of just seeped into a lot of independent South Asian filmmaking, which makes sense because this film is also written by Imran Perretta in collaboration with Enda Walsh, who is an Irish writer.
Okay.
But yeah, so basically these two boys, Ish and Maram, are really good friends. And we open when they're in this like random like forest kind of a place, and they're picking blackberries, and they're dragging a mattress, and they're kind of creating their secret little nook. And then you hear like the whoosh of an airplane, and the camera turns up, and you see like a plane like almost brushing the leaves, and you're like, okay, so we are not in London, we are somewhere in one of the London airports.
Most of which are outside London.
Exactly, most of which are outside London. And then slowly, you kind of discover from like the saying that you are in Luton.
No comments, I'll pass on Luton right now.
No, this, I'll get to the Luton bits of it. But so
Okay.
this film is 87 minutes, right? Not even an hour and a half long. But
Yeah.
it spends so much time kind of on these two boys. And then you can kind of tell that one of them is older and goes to a different school. So Maram goes to a different school and is friends with these other boys, and is kind of is of a different class than the other. So it's indicated that it's a slightly rougher school, and Ish comes from a slightly, I think, higher kind of class background, though it's not that different. They're both like middle class. That's kind of established.
Yeah.
You can kind of tell that there are these small differences between them, but they're not that massive. And then they go to a fair and they meet with Maram's school friends, these three other boys. And Ish kind of feels a little bit like on the outside because of that. And it's like, is it because these four boys are clearly older and have their own set of like, social dynamics, etc., etc. And but they all also welcome
like a classic,
Ish.
like I want to fit in with these kids, but I feel left a bit outside the circle.
Exactly. And that kind of frames a lot of this movie. But the turning point that I was talking about is when Maram and Ish are kind of walking along the street. And like Maram is like telling Ish like, why were you so weird around like those other three boys, etc., etc. And Ish kind of is like really on edge, and you can't tell why. And he keeps turning around to look, and then you see why, because a van just pulls up behind them, and Maram has a bike, and you can hear someone yelling, drop the bike. But you don't really see who it is or what it is, because Ish runs away and we follow Ish.
Oh, that's interesting.
Exactly. And how we know what has happened is because then we come back and we see Maram being like thrown out of this van, and he just kind of like has to pick up and move on. But why we know exactly what this is because throughout the rest of the film, up until this point, there is this constant noise and image of surveillance. So you'll be familiar with this, like the Prevent scheme in England, where young men and like young kids are monitored for potentially threatening or suspicious activity.
Yeah, they're just making sure they're not getting into either like right-wing extremism or just like religious extremism, or also like having to do with like drug smuggling, all of those things.
Exactly. But in a lot of places, the prevent scheme is used as a way for the police to be xenophobic and specifically Islamophobic as well, right?
Yeah.
So we are in Luton in this film, and you always see vans going around. You always hear police sirens, ambulance sirens. There is always this constant sense of danger or threat of danger, but that threat of danger comes from the state and the police. You see kids like being picked up. You see like yelling and screaming. There's a lot of the time, there's so many shots in the film where you are inside the surveillance van and you're watching like the streets through this like camera of like facial identification and stuff like that. So that sense of kind of like that these boys are constantly being watched and not allowed to be boys because they are constantly being watched is imposed on the audience as well. And you kind of sit there thinking, you kind of sit there questioning your own biases against boys who look like them and boys who behave the way they behave and young men who behave the way they behave. And so it's really interesting how it's a story about the friendship between these boys and kind of it is a Bildungsroman in a sense of like how these kids kind of grow a certain way, but it's all framed by this constant discrimination and surveillance that is imposed on them. And so I think that was such an interesting thing to watch. And it was so like moving because there's so much talk about like police brutality in the US, right? And rightfully so. But then you kind of look closer to home and that exists here as well. It just takes place under the guise of things like the Prevent program. And the film, I think, where this really drives it to home is the film begins with this shoe and this cycle that are on the street. And in the background, you hear, he's just a kid, man. He's just a kid. Leave him alone, etc., etc., etc. And so you kind of, and then you see Ish and Maram and you're like, shit, are we going to see them being brutalized in this kind of way? So the film constantly keeps you on edge as well.
Again, so that like pretty much as an audience member, you're very much put into that same place as those like 5 South Asian boys who are living in Luton, a town which can be very diverse, but can also feel very, like you said, like you're on edge the whole time. There's a lot to speak on it. Oftentimes it gets shit on by a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I can to some degree understand why. But like if you're from there, like no one wants to hear like, hey, the town you're from sucks. But also like it's incredibly diverse in also a way, despite some people that have come from it, you know?
Exactly. No. Yeah. And so this film really is, now getting to the Luton bit of it, this film really is in a way also kind of like a hug to Luton or to the people of Luton to be like, you guys aren't a shithole. You have so much heart and so much warmth despite the amount of shit you are put through.
Yeah.
In those diverse communities, specifically for those diverse communities as well. So I think it was kind of framed as that way. And what really sells that is that the main characters, the 5 main boys, are all from Luton. They have no prior acting experience. They were literally kind of
grabbed from the street.
Street cast. Yeah. 3 of them were street casted. 2 of them did auditions. The main 2 characters did auditions. The other 3 were street casted. All from Luton. And I was there for like a Q&A with them while I was after this film. And they're still young boys. They're still like, I'm guessing not older than 15 perhaps. And they were talking about how nice it is to see boys like them be appreciated by so many people in a room in London. And kind of even just have stories like theirs be put on a big screen like that. Obviously, they were young boys in the kind of young boy sense. There's so much humor. There's so much like, so many like stupid jokes, stupid decisions. Like at one point they steal firecrackers and like burst them in the forest and then, obviously get picked up by the police because of that, etc., etc. And kind of going back to this like main bit where Ish runs away from Maram, that kind of fractures their relationship and kind of pulls them apart. And you see kind of Ish struggling to find like community with these boys or kind of get an in with these boys when they kind of take sides because loyalty is like a huge thing. And then Ish kind of grows closer to his family and he himself is dealing with the loss of his mom who's just passed away recently. Like within a few years we're meant to like see. So how to kind of deal with that, the loss of your mother at such a young age, and how you kind of deal with that growing in an environment where you're so heavily racialized. And then this thing happens where you're trying to protect yourself, so you get separated from your best friends, and you kind of, there's a sense of loss of community, loss of identity. All of that kind of like works within this like small short film, which can seem like a lot of it was stuffed in a
Yeah, that's what I'm
short
thinking.
time.
I do feel with everything that you're saying, this film would probably run into the issue of like overstuffing and like trying to take a bite too big.
No, and that's definitely something as well, because there's one like prime feature of this film as well is there's a constant radio or news playing in the background when there's no dialogue, and or on the phone or on Instagram, where these kids are listening to the genocide happening in Palestine. They're cheering about what is happening in Palestine because Maram is Palestinian.
Okay.
So that kind of like really frames a lot of how these young Muslim boys behave. There's a whole scene where Maram is talking to Ish about how he's acquired like a small knife or something, of how he's going to like beat up the ops, or how if the ops come to him, he's going to like fuck them up or something. And at first you think, okay, this is like young boys being like boys and like ops and stuff. But then he's like, no, the Zionists, when they come, and you're like, oh shit, okay. So
it's also like a kid trying to understand something that is, I wouldn't say necessarily nuanced, but I will say a lot. Like it's a lot for a kid to grapple with. And so he's understanding and like reacting to it in his own way, and fully realizing how that can lead to some very bad decisions. Like basically, at the end of the day, a child should not have a knife.
Exactly. And so the film is dated in 2025, 2020 at least, right? So it kind of really shows the amount of shit that these young boys have to deal with. But it never, even in what you're saying, it definitely puts it across that it's absurd that a young boy has has a knife or has weapons, even though he is responding to very real incidents. That's the kind of the point of the film, is it never dehumanizes these kids. It never forgets to show them as victims of so many systems that are working to socialize them in this manner, disadvantage them. Yes. So I think it was a really, really fantastic film and crafted so beautifully. It's shot entirely in black and white.
Oh.
And which is such an interesting decision. The director, like Imran Perretta on the day, was like, someone asked him about the decision to shoot black and white. And he was like, well, these are brown boys, but brown boys are never shown in this way in black and white in this country. Why not? Perretta himself is like an artist who's worked with different mediums before. So there's a lot of that that informs his filmmaking as well. But I think, just overall in terms of performance, in terms of like story, in terms of writing, I think this was a fantastic film that like I'm so glad is being like distributed by the BFI. It is produced by BBC Film, which is so funny to me that the BBC...
I think in a slight, I don't know if this is rebuttal or justification or whatever, but the BBC is very big. There are a lot of wings of the BBC that do good work very genuinely. As someone who's like been on BBC radio and
I've
stuff
always I've always managed to separate BBC News from BBC Film.
And also BBC News London, like BBC News Urdu. There's like so many wings of the BBC. It's like the NHS, where like there are certain parts of the NHS which have problems, but it would be very dumb, I'll be honest, to be like, that means every single nurse that works is like a problem. That's just not true.
Exactly. So it's like a mixture of indie filmmaking plus then this nationalized kind of distribution and production kind of system, which I'm glad, because we need to be watching films like these. And I think what has just shown me is like over the past year, I've watched so many British films, like British made films or films kind of funded by British filmmaking programs. And I think it's such a counter to Hollywood and the entire industry of Hollywood that I think it's really like heartening to watch, especially because of stories like Ish that are being told.
Absolutely. I agree. Like, it makes for a richer experience, I think, and you have seen that multiple times. Like I was watching a video today on like just like the history, like television shows and everything. And there is this idea of like, like you need to be mainstream and appealing. It's like, which is just not true. there's so many in the UK, like there's so many shows which have focused on brown, Muslim, or like just South Asian people and have had incredible success and have become like iconic. Like Skins is one that I'm thinking of on the top of my
Exactly.
head.
Yeah.
So I think there is much more, I don't know, maybe like from a very like less informed perspective I'm coming from it, but there is like a tradition in the UK of like making shows and films centered around small towns and trying to highlight those small towns despite like the Britishness of like every place is a shithole. This entire place is
Exactly. And trying to counter the kind of like white supremacist, racist notions that surround these towns outside of London.
definitely a better thing to come out of Luton than Tommy Robinson.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are our thoughts. Thank you for tuning in. This podcast is produced solely by us with musical assets from Pixabay. If you enjoyed this, please do share it. See you again next time.
Bye-bye.